Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be covering a story a little more in depth than I've mentioned in the past, and that is about this article from The Guardian saying that Rings of Power is so astounding it makes House of the Dragon look amateur. Now, I've commented on this before in passing, mostly just talking about the headline, and I wanted to go a little more in depth into the article because, well, there was some pushback on this, mostly around whether or not this is shilling for Amazon. And now the reason why I call this shilling for Amazon is because at no time does the author here ever prove her point about House of the Dragon being amateur. At no point does she take a scene from Rings of Power and compare it to a scene of House of the Dragon and do any kind of analysis. She simply talks about Rings of Power, talks about how she likes it, and doesn't provide any evidence of how it actually makes House of the Dragon look amateur. Now, I agree we can all have a difference of opinion on whether or not we like Rings of Power, and we can all have a difference of opinion on whether or not we like House of the Dragon. But this goes beyond a simple disagreement of opinion, because she is asserting that Rings of Power is, again, so astounding, it makes House of the Dragon look amateur. I mean, this is like saying, oh yeah, House of the Dragon? Yeah, my kids put on a better school play than that. Is that really the case? Well, without further ado, let's get into this article and start picking it apart. I think you're going to enjoy this. Now, there's a lot of things in here, like just meaningless stuff. Like, this is TV that is made for big screens, although surely destined to be watched on smaller ones. Okay, I mean, what does that even mean? I mean, you're talking about it needs to be in the movie theater? They did feature, actually, episode 1 and 2 in movie theaters for some people, but the people that I know that went and saw it said the same thing that everyone else is saying about it, that it was boring, and that that the dialogue was terrible, and that, yeah, sure, certain scenes look good, but there's even complaints about some of the CGI on this as well. So is that enough then to make House of the Dragon look amateur? I don't know. It is so cinematic and grand that it makes House of the Dragon look as if it has been cobbled together on Minecraft. Now, I've seen House of the Dragon. I've seen episode 1, and I can tell you that it looks pretty good. Now, that doesn't mean I am blind to the issues in House of the Dragon. For example, the opening shot, I was not the biggest fan of. There was something about the dragon, I just didn't like the way it looked in that scene where it was flying, and yet there were other scenes where they interact closely with the dragons, and other scenes of the dragon on a hill or at a distance that didn't look bad to me, that I didn't look at and go, I'm not buying it. They were better scenes, but that flying scene, the opening scene with Rhaenyra flying on the dragon, I just didn't buy it. So I'm not saying House of the Dragon is perfect, but I think to make the argument that it's amateur, that sounds like someone going above and beyond. That sounds like a clickbait headline. Now, this makes it difficult to judge The Rings of Power as an ordinary series because so much about it is extraordinary. Oh, really? What kinds of things are extraordinary? It is Tolkien. Look, the fact that it is Tolkien doesn't make it extraordinary. In fact, there's 3 amazing movies from Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings, the entire trilogy. But there's also 3 movies by Peter Jackson that are not so great, that are also Tolkien, and those are the Hobbit trilogy. No, you don't get deference just because the author, because it's all about how it is adapted. And I would say, if I'm looking at Peter Jackson, he basically has a 50-50 split on this. If he made something else from Tolkien, I don't know that I would automatically run right out and see it unless it was more like Lord of the Rings than like The Hobbit. I think basically The Hobbit was, Lord of the Rings 2, The Search for More Money. It is Tolkien, which means this world is already venerated and beloved by so many. Yes, it is venerated and beloved by so many, but again, that doesn't mean that you get the benefit of the doubt. You have to prove that you did a good job, and these people have not proven that. There are many objections that people have had, how they're not even following Tolkien, and that's a problem. They're not following the lore. They're not following the canon. They're putting people together that never met. They're doing all sorts of things. They've made Galadriel a commander of northern armies, which she never was. I mean, you think that Tolkien would have mentioned that if that's who she was. He never mentions her fighting once. The entire First Age or Second Age. It doesn't get mentioned by Tolkien. There is an extraordinary weight of expectation before any viewer presses play. Yes, there is. Add to that the fact that this is reportedly the most... what does it have to do with how the expense of this? How does that translate into making House of the Dragon look amateur? It is an event, a spectacle, but if it isn't entirely perfect, does that make it a failure? Again, what excuses are you trying to make here? Where are you going to back up your assertion that it's so amazing that it looks like it makes House of the Dragon look amateur? You're already backpedaling. The first 10 minutes of the opening episode set a fantastically busy, robust pace and tone. It begins calmly and beautifully, in Valinor. Then it puts its foot down sharply, racing through centuries of history and war, and crucially, the overthrow of the Dark Lord of Morgoth. It's trying to cover backstory. I'm usually wary of having to read primers before embarking on a new series. It should stand alone, but here it is probably helpful to do a small amount of homework. No, I didn't have to do any homework for Lord of the Rings or that trilogy by Peter Jackson. They stood alone, and that is how the work should be. It should stand alone. If you do a good job, if your writers know what they're doing, you don't need to have that. If there is backstory that needs to be explained, you just told us how it needs to be explained. You need to include it. And we need to see, not be told. Show, don't tell. By the time it settles into the twilight of the Second Age, Galadriel is the commander of the northern armies. No, she's not. The warrior of the wastelands. No, she's not. Still hunting Morgoth's lieutenant. No, she never did that. On a hunch, centuries after most elves believe he has been defeated. That is not how it went. She knew Sauron was back, but she didn't know it was Sauron. She wasn't sure that who it is, but she was one of the people that knew that there was an evil rising, and she was one of the people that never trusted Anatar. And you could have shown this, and this could have been a strength of Galadriel. This is a strength we already know that she has, and you could have shown it, and you could put that on display, but you chose to ignore the lore, you chose to ignore the canon. I love Galadriel the fighter. This author doesn't know what she's talking about. She has no idea what Tolkien actually is, what he wrote, and this is proof because she likes something that is not what Tolkien wrote. She wants us to give deference and reverence for this just because it has Tolkien's name on it. No, it doesn't have Peter Jackson's name on it, and we don't even give him deference and veneration automatically. If the elves bring the intensity, then there is plenty of earthy light and joy in the Harfoots, Tolkien's predecessor to the hobbits. Thank you for that little bit of honesty where you admit that Harfoots are hobbits. The opening episode also introduces us to the Southlands, where elves and humans coexist uneasily amid decades of resentment and the aftermath of the war. Now, I will note there definitely was some friction between men and elves, and that's a good thing to show. That actually is something that is documented in the Second Age in Tolkien's writings. It takes until the second episode and the arrival of the dwarves for the immersive feeling to flourish. Translation: the first episode was fucking boring. That sense that this is a fully realized world worth jumping into wholeheartedly. Again, translation: the first episode is boring. Now, how does this support your assertion that this show makes House of the Dragon look amateur? Here we are. You're already almost all the way through your article. You haven't proven anything about how great Rings of Power actually is. You've just told me that I should like it because Tolkien's name is somewhere on it, even though it's obviously not even a faithful adaptation, which is what the fans have been complaining about all along. The dwarves anchor it and temper some of the show's more pompous instincts. Yeah, that's a translation for holy crap, the dialogue is so over the top, pompous sounding and meaningless that it's terrible. It is not much of a spoiler to say the initial ideal is soon shattered. Actually, that nobody believes Galadriel, of course, because they're a bunch of men and they've been portrayed with a negative male stereotype because that's what all the woke shows do these days. If you don't believe me, then you only have to watch She-Hulk. The first 4 minutes of the second episode, where there are 4 different males and each male is presented in a negative stereotype. And that's exactly the sort of woke crap that people are complaining about. That's why we complain about these things. In other words, the writers are so bad that they don't know how to portray Galadriel as a strong woman that they have to emasculate the men. They have to make the men look weak because they don't know how to make a woman look strong. Towards the end of episode 2, it is breathlessly tense and far more gruesome than I anticipated. You compared this to House of the Dragon, and this is too gruesome for you? What are you even on about? What are you even on? What are you smoking? I have a couple of small reservations, and here it is. Here is the caveats that get put in the end of every single one of these articles, where the person will now talk about what is actually wrong with Rings of Power. This is so later on, when this show is found out to be the absolute stinking turd that it is, that they can go, see, I told you so. In my first article, I talked about that. I have a couple of small reservations. On occasion, there is a whiff of smell the fart acting, which is perhaps hard to avoid when every other line is a poker-faced aphorism, such as, a dog may bark at the moon, but he cannot bring it down. Yeah, that's called terrible dialogue. We already talked about that. And if the dialogue is that terrible, then maybe, again, the writers should watch some good dialogue. Maybe, for example, they could tune in to the first few seasons of Game of Thrones, which has actually good dialogue, and about 1 million videos online analyzing why that dialogue is good. It's mostly because the dialogue is not on the nose, and it's not like someone has to say, look, Tywin is a great king. Tywin has these features. Tywin has these features. No, Tywin shows what features he has through the dialogue he chooses, through how he chooses to express himself. The pace, too, is a little all or nothing. Yeah, I knew we were going to get to this. It either races through astonishing action scenes. Translation, the action scenes are poorly done because they're too quick. Like, for example, everyone getting knocked about by the snow troll except for Galadriel, of course, who comes in and schnicker-snack kills the snow troll before you even know what the hell is happening. Even the scene that people are complaining about online that shows Legolas taking down the Oliphant, some guy is using that as an excuse to show how even the male elves and Legolas did this in Lord of the Rings. No, even that looks like more effort was put into it, and like Legolas had to expend more effort to actually achieve that than what looks like is happening in that scene with the snow troll. I mean, she literally looks like she doesn't have to even try. Whereas a moment before, the snow troll is so strong that it's literally just throwing every elven man in the room around. Again, emasculating the males, portraying them in a negative stereotype so that they can somehow elevate the female, the woman. It either races through astonishing action scenes or lingers on a single conversation or meaningful look. In other words, damn, the action scenes are too short, they suck, and this show is freaking boring in the other scenes. These are mere quibbles. In the end, the spectacle wins. So you're telling me you like this show just because you think it looks good, but not because of the dialogue, not because of the pacing, not because of the characters, not because of the action scenes. Wow. Just wow. And I'm supposed to think that from that Rings of Power is actually better than House of Dragons? I'm supposed to think from that Rings of Power actually makes House of the Dragons look amateur? I'm going to tell you, I'm not convinced. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. In the meantime, if you want to continue to smash the narrative, then smash the like, subscribe, and share buttons, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.